have to do that. Sean, can you hear us?
Yes, but while you're muted, I can't hear you.
Okay, so I think we'll take my microphone off. I don't know if you can hear the microphone in the room, but we're gonna test that. I'm gonna put my microphone on mute and then see if you can hear us through the room's microphone.
Okay, thank you. Can't hear anything now. Oh,
Okay, can you hear us now?
yes.
Okay. So I think we'll have to use my microphone.
And Sean, can you hear the other side of the room talking? Okay,
I can, thank you.
perfect. So
Good.
seems to be at least falling through. Awesome. Well, we've got Sean now, city manager on the line, and nobody else online, correct?
That's correct.
Perfect. So with that, I will call for the motion to approve the April 26th minutes. Do we have a first for that?
I'm with you first.
And a second? All right, all in favor of approving April 26th minute, aye? Aye. Opposed? Those are approved. And we've got a busy night tonight. Going to hear from transportation and then have an opportunity to discuss the capital improvement projects and a recap from that. So want to just get right into it and hand it over to Ms. DeAndre.
You. I think I've met most of you, but if you're not, I've not met you, and Maria, again, with the director, as the director of public. So happy to be here tonight to talk about transportation. It is a big focus of the public works, but it also really touches a lot of other areas. And Tim, we're going to go through kind of a couple of these slides that we're.
Yeah, I can quickly if that's okay.
Sure.
Actually, when City Council adopted the new version of the strategic plan this spring, transportation and infrastructure were merged into one of the outcome areas, one of the 7 areas of our plan. But just as a reminder, we're following the way the plan was written at the time that we did this presentation. So we found that there was a really strong nexus, obviously, between transportation and infrastructure. In the new iteration of the plan, we also have goals related to intermodality of transportation and also transportation safety. What you see here are a few slides that basically show that capture basically our successes and some projects that we were still working on at the end of the first iteration of our strategic plan that ended in December of 2021. The Walk and Wheel Initiative was a big project that the Director DeAndrea will touch on during our presentations. There was a lot of work that was done also related to Oxford Pedestrian Bridge, connecting. I'm sure Director DeAndrea will also talk about our Englewood Trolley. That's a program that's primarily run on our community development department, but it's something that we've partnered with RTD on for a few years now, I believe. ETAC, you see here is a committee just like this. It's our Transportation Advisory Committee that's played a role in shaping a lot of the policies and programs that you see. And I think there's one more slide. So this just shows, so streetscape is something that's really important from an infrastructure point of view, a transportation point of view, a community development point of view. It touches many different parks and recreation, library and golf as well. So it's a large scale project that we plan to work on. There's a huge safety component as well. As I mentioned now in our existing strategic plan, we have a whole goal related to transportation safety. I'm sure Director DeAndrea will talk about that. There's a lot that's been going into traffic calming measures. There's a national program called Vision Zero that Dr. Cog, our local council of government, is a part of, that we have been working to get resources and information on. So essentially the Vision Zero is a measurement of no severe injuries or fatalities related to transportation. And it's kind of a national program. As I mentioned, the Streetscape program is a rather large initiative. We also really, and this fits into economic development, as we, kind of as council and the community looks at the future of this space, we look at how we can connect different areas of the city. So how do we connect what we call city center, which is where we are right now, with the downtown and Broadway corridors, also with the hospital or wellness district. There's a concept you probably have heard of called the last mile. It's basically a concept of, okay, someone can take the train here, but how do they take the train to Englewood from downtown Denver and then go to Grow and Gather, or then go and meet their friends. And so the connectivity of different parts of transportation is something that we're really focused on, and another big component of the work Director DeAndre and her team have been doing that I'm sure she'll address is sidewalk assessments. So sidewalks obviously represent accessibility. They're a critical part of our transportation infrastructure, and they're an area that we've really been focusing on in the last several years. An overview, and this is our, probably can't read it, but it is a link. Thanks, Shane, for having the link there. So you can open the link and you can see the whole plan, and you can see all the different goals. So this is our new transportation and infrastructure section. So as I mentioned, they've been combined, but we do have a few goals that are called out. So I think it's goal 6 is focused on multimodal transportation. Goal 7 is focused on transportation safety. And then there's other goals in there that relate to transportation infrastructure. So just goal number 3.
Great, thanks, Tim. As he mentioned, there really is 2 focus areas for us. And I'll talk about kind of what we accomplished in 2021, as well as what we're planning to do in 2022, but really around transportation safety in general, as well as the overall just kind of focus on that larger goal of multimodal transportation. So a lot of Englewood was developed with a focus on vehicles, not necessarily on transit users, pedestrians, or bicyclists. And what we're trying to do now is make those modes safe, as well as a viable alternative in case you want to go to the grocery store, in case you want to take a short trip, instead of getting in the car, have another means of getting there in a safe and convenient manner. So a lot of our projects are focused more on that bike ped experience because we haven't given that as much emphasis as we have in the past. So just to touch, there's several projects. I break these into projects, programs, and studies. Programs are things that we do every year. Things that we focus on so that we make sure that we're maintaining the infrastructure that we have, all the money that we've already invested in our transportation network is staying up to speed and is staying steady. So I'll start there with that column in the middle. Last year, we actually implemented an asset management software called Cartograph. Many other communities use that software as municipalities. And basically what that allows us to do is to inventory everything that we have. So let's say sidewalks, for example, and then actually manage that in a more proactive fashion. So we've actually divided the city up into 5 areas. I've talked with the group in the past about our pavement maintenance, and we'll touch on that in a minute here, but we do that for sidewalks too, those same 5 zones. So we go out proactively each year, address one zone. If somebody walks all the sidewalks in that area and looks for defects. So we're looking for any kind of trip hazards of a 3/4 inch or greater, significant cracking, deflected curb that might need to be addressed where you could maybe fall off the edge, things like that. Again, it's a safety issue. We want to make that convenient and comfortable for people to walk on. We know we have a lot of narrow sidewalks as well, so people don't feel comfortable necessarily walking 2 abreast. Typically our gutters and the sidewalk are continuous, and so it feels a little bit uncomfortable. So we want to make that as quality as we can, knowing those limitations. So we did implement this asset management software. We've been focused on for this first year pavements. Again, I'll touch on that in a minute, as well as sidewalks, and then our street signage system, which will be coming up next. We also annually do a pedestrian ramp replacement. So those are the things at the corners with where the curb is actually lowered, and so a wheelchair can actually access up onto the sidewalk at each of the corners. There's very strict guidelines from the federal standpoint of how those are to be designed and constructed to accommodate wheelchair users, blind people, different things like that. Again, anybody who falls under those various ADA categories. So we not only go to locations where there are no ped ramps on corners, but we're also going back and retrofitting in cases where they currently don't meet the guidelines. And that might be because they're too steep. Those detectable little bumps that you have at the corner are either not there or they're the wrong color. There's just a lot of things that go into that. So we're doing that very proactively as well, trying to get to follow those 5 areas of the pavement maintenance zones to make sure that we're kind of almost swooping in and doing 1 zone per year and staying ahead of that. And then, as I mentioned, our sidewalk maintenance. So we're doing 2 elements there. So we have contracted for the last 3 years with a company that will actually go out and grind down the edges of the sidewalk slabs where there is a raised or a trip hazard. And that will save us from having to actually tear out the entire piece of concrete and replace it, just to create or fix that one little lip. Usually we can get away with that if it's less than an inch, and the rest of the concrete stone is still in good shape. If there is significant cracking, or if it's raised more than that, then you're starting to kind of get into, usually sidewalks are only 4 inches thick. So if you're taking more than an inch out, then you're probably compromising the integrity of that concrete slab, and we do have to remove and replace. So we have basically 2 elements for sidewalk maintenance. We're trying to do as much of that grinding as possible because it's usually much, much cheaper than removing and replacing. It goes a lot faster. And then, but there are some element or pieces where we just simply have to remove and replace. So we have both contracts go every single year. From a study standpoint, we did last year go through and rate every single segment of pavement within the city. So we give that a rating from 0 to 100, and that was actually both qualitative, somebody actually visualizing the distresses in the pavement, as well as then measuring the amount of that, so a quantitative assessment, and together those combine to a score of anywhere from 0, which is the poorest, to 100, which is perfect. And so our average rating of all the street segments within the city is 59. Not good, but not bad either. So we're right on the cusp of that fair category. What we want to take away or have to take away with you is that it's easy to quickly slope down. Where we start to get into the 50s, now we're talking about expending more money to bring those pavements up to a good or excellent condition than we are where we are right now on that cusp of fair. Now we can get away with some of those lesser treatments like putting a slurry seal coat down, things like that to protect the existing pavement. Whereas if we let it go much farther, then we're talking about removing and replacing all of the asphalt through a mill and overlay or a full reconstruction. So that was a good effort to undertake. We also inventoried all of the missing sidewalk segments. So surprising to some, in certain areas, we have about 10 miles of sidewalks that don't exist in various locations. It could be, sometimes it's one side of the street, then both sides of the street, residential areas, commercial areas, it's very random. So we've actually identified all of those, we have a map, and then we prioritize those based on criteria like how often would people maybe walk there, how easy would that be to construct? Of course, these segments, why were they probably not built? Because they're hard to build. There's things in the way, there's buildings, or there's grade issues that's probably keeping them from being built. And finally, we also inventoried all of our pedestrian ramps. So how many are we still missing where we just have none at the corners? How many are substandard? And we have still about 140 corners where we still just have no ramps at all. So again, as we move through the zones, our plan is to attack those, at least get a ramp there, and then again, continue to prioritize upgrading ramps to meet the current ADA federal guidelines. Oh, I'm sorry, Jay.
Oh, sorry.
Could I go back?
Yep,
to
yep.
I just didn't do the project.
Sorry.
I started in the middle column.
Oh, okay.
Shake it up here instead of working left to right. I'll just touch on a couple of key projects. I think so pavement maintenance, again, we do that every year. Last year we were in zone 3, which is essentially west of Broadway, north of 285. Did a whole lot of work there, probably more. We got some additional funding through city council. We spent about $2 million up in that zone to do more pavements. And it was, if you live up in that area, you're probably aware of the construction that was going on. But we did a lot of ped ramps and a lot of pavement work back there. And then zone 4 is where we actually did some slurry seal work. So that, again, that's that surface coating where we're trying to protect those streets that are already in good condition and make their life longer through that action. We also completed the design of the Oxford Ped Bridge. So this is we got federal funding for this, a good portion of it. This is a bridge from the south side of Oxford Avenue, just west of Windermere Navajo intersection. So that's where the Sheridan Light Rail station is. So we would build a pedestrian bridge up and over Oxford to basically connect the apartments and more of the multifamily that will follow going down Windermere to that light rail station at the Sheridan Station. We are now in the stages, we just did that out, and we're looking now, the prices did come in higher than we anticipated, so we're trying to identify funding to determine if we're gonna move. We also wrapped up the design earlier this year, but took up most of 2021 to design the interchange at 285 and Broadway, and that was the first slide that Jenny had in this deck. If you wouldn't mind just going backwards for a minute to the very first slide. Really going random, we're going out of order here. But I wanted to show that picture from the overhead view, the plan view. So you can see there, yeah, so we would rebuild the Broadway bridge, so Broadway goes over 285. And we'd actually, if you're familiar with that, if you drive 285 at all, when you're driving, let's say westbound, and you want to get off on Broadway, you have 3 lanes going westbound, and that 3rd lane actually becomes the off ramp. And then there's only 2 lanes going under the bridge in either direction. So it's a bottleneck. And so what we're going to do is widen the bridge on Broadway so that will allow for 3 through lanes in each direction and eliminate that bottleneck. So we're hoping to make a lot of improvements from a transportation standpoint through that intersection. We're also going to modify some of the alignment of the on and off ramps, improve the pedestrian lighting across the bridge, as well as add more trail and sidewalk through the entire length of 285. So that work is getting, we're just about ready. We've almost got concurrence from CDOT to go out for bids on that. Again, we got a pretty substantial amount, over $10 million of funding from a federal standpoint, federal and state, for that project in conjunction with the money that the city is putting in. And so we think we're going to be able to go out for bids here within the next month or so and start construction hopefully later this fall. That would go through all of 2023 and likely wrap up in the spring of 2024.
Oh, no, no worries.
Now I'll stay on track. For sure.
I'm gonna hold you to it.
Yeah, so I think I touched on all the projects. Yeah, so I mentioned the Zoonai bike lanes. So we worked with the city and county of Denver. Zoonai is over on the upper northwest portion of the city. And Zoonai is a north-south street that runs from Evans all the way down to Dartmouth within the city of Englewood. East side is Englewood, west side is Broadway, or west side is Denver. And so we worked in conjunction with them to do what's called buffered bike lanes. So there's about a 4-foot area that's straight where nothing really happens. And then there's a dedicated bike lane, one direction on the east side of the street that goes northbound, and then another bike lane that goes south on the west side of the street. We did need to remove parking on either one side or the other to make room for those bike lanes. And that was a process, again, that was we were assisted with Denver staff to communicate with the public and make that happen. So I think that turned out really nice. If you never really drive over in that area, and give it a shot, just take a look at it, because it really does change the character of the street from more of this kind of thoroughfare. It really narrows down, again, the area available for vehicles and gives more room for bikes to drive and travel along there. And then we also added bike lanes on Windermere Street. So we went from about, the city of the county of Littleton had brought it up to just north of Bellevue. And so we took it from there and continued up north to about Tufts Avenue, which is where this curve is in Windermere. And then north of there, we didn't have enough room on street. And so instead we put those Sharrow bike lanes or bike markings on the pavement. But where we could, we did do bike lanes on street in that location as well. So we added last year roughly 1.75 miles of bike lanes to the city. So our planned efforts for this year, again, I touched on construction. So again, we'll be doing our annual pavement maintenance work. This year we'll be focused on zone 4 and 5. And a lot of, if you want more detail, you can go on the Public Works website to see those areas and specific streets that will be worked on. As I mentioned, we'll be hopefully constructing the Oxford Pent Bridge, as well as starting construction on the 285 and Broadway interchange. And then finally, our Dartmouth Bridge reconstruction project. So this is your travel on Santa Fe and go west on Dartmouth. This is more of our industrial area. We're going to reconstruct Dartmouth Bridge and widen that as well to allow for more turning movements. There's gets a lot of truck traffic over there, as you can imagine. And so there's a lot of backing up of traffic because people can't, there's simply, the vehicles are in the through turn lane. And so when they wait to turn, they're backing everybody up and stacking behind them. So we will widen the sidewalks as well across the bridge to allow for better pedestrian connectivity, as well as upgrade the traffic signals on either end of the bridge. We've been working with Excel for probably upwards of 9 to 12 months already on that project because we have to underground some of their overhead lines and they need to get out ahead of us before we can actually start that construction work. So we're currently hoping, fingers crossed, that they will complete their work by August so we can start our bridge project later this fall. Again, the same programs for pedestrian ramp upgrades, sidewalk maintenance. I do want to talk about the neighborhood traffic calming. So our plan is to put a neighborhood traffic calming program together that would identify if a particular block or a neighbor has concerns about speeding, how do we work with Englewood PD to address that? So we talk about the 3 E's. So engineering is what Public Works can bring to the table, maybe some physical modifications to the intersection or to the streets. Then the second E is enforcement through the PD, and then finally education. So if it's a residential street, most likely it's someone locally who's traveling too fast. And so how can we educate ourselves and our neighbors to drive slower, be conscious and more aware of our impacts on others? So similar to that, we're undertaking a couple of projects. The East Dartmouth Traffic Calming Project was going from roughly Broadway all the way to our border with Denver to look at possibly removing 3 of our traffic signals and replacing them with small mini roundabouts. The idea being is that instead of having, if you happen to have the green light, but that there's continuous movements with a mini roundabout as opposed to having to stop, especially in the middle of the night. You're stopping at a red light for nothing, and we've experienced a pattern there of broadside crashes because people are either misjudging the gaps or they're taking those chances with oncoming traffic. We're also looking at doing some traffic calming on West Dartmouth. So again, kind of the bridge project that I mentioned, west of there out to our border with Sheridan, is looking at narrowing down the lanes to add bike lanes and possibly widen the sidewalks there as well. And then finally, as far as studies, we're looking at doing a citywide signage inventory. So this is all our regulatory signs, so stop signs, yield signs, our street name signs, all of that, we would inventory them and put them in our asset management plan. And then I forgot to add for studies, so we're also, Englewood is taking the lead along with CDOT and Cherry Hills Village, City and County of Denver, as well as Sheridan and Arapahoe County to look at the 285 corridor from, if you're familiar, the last signal as you go west is at Knoxport Lowell Boulevard. That's an intersection where you get to Mullen High School. That's in Sheridan. So that's the last signal. Beyond that, it's basically a freeway section. So we're going from there all the way to I-25. It's about a 6-mile segment. And we're looking at that because if you imagine that corridor in your mind, there's not a lot of room to widen. So there's a lot of congestion issues, not a lot of bike facilities, not a lot of opportunity to do anything except get in your car and move at a snail's pace from one signal to another. So what can we do in terms of not necessarily adding capacity in terms of lanes, but maybe do things like add right turn lanes or left turn lanes to get people out of that flow of traffic, the bottlenecks that I mentioned at 285 and Broadway, things we can help do without taking up more space to make things just flow more efficiently. With that project, we'll also be looking at adding sidewalks. If you're familiar with the Denver section, you can see through like at the intersection with Happy Canyon, that weird kind of 5-way intersection. There's always a beaten path where people walk, but there's just no sidewalk. So we know people are using it. It's then how do we start to build that infrastructure so people can do that again in a safe manner. So that study would look at all of those elements and then prioritize those projects for future federal funding. might be, you know, through the city of Englewood, or it might be something that Denver does in their segment, something that Sheridan does in their segment. Any questions on that before I move on? Any other projects you want to ask about?
Is there also a study commission for the Santa Fe corridor?
Yes, we just completed that, or they're in the process of wrapping that up. So it's a very similar process where they identified projects that they could complete in the near term as well as the long term. One of the things we're looking at doing is building a sidewalk. You can see the worn path through Santa Fe and the cloverleaf ramps down here where people walk to those apartments right over here in Sheridan. Back probably to the light rail station or other areas here in Englewood. So one of the early action items is to build that sidewalk with appropriate pedestrian signage and probably signals or flashing signs of some sort. So when pedestrians cross the clover leaves, obviously that's not safe, but at least to build something there so they can traverse that in a more safe manner. But yeah, that identified in a similar way, priority projects up and down the corridor that will now start to be implemented as funding is, becomes available.
Just a curious question. These studies, this study extra.
Typically, it's led, it depends on the agency that advances the project. So for the Santa Fe PEL, it was actually CDOT who's leading that because it is a CDOT road. It's a regional roadway, and so they're taking the lead. We did contribute as well as Littleton, Denver, Sheridan contributed partially to the funding. But then typically what they'll do is they'll hire an engineering consultant to actually do the project or do that analysis. And then we weigh in as there's a technical advisory committee as well as an executive advisory committee to give input back to the project development team before that final document. Difficult process. So as I mentioned, it's a little unique for us to take on, but we applied for the funding for the Hampton corridor just because there's such a need within Englewood. We've had a number of pedestrian fatalities along Hampton, as well as further west east as you get towards I-25. And so we saw the need there. CDOT didn't necessarily step up, but we did. And then again, the partner agencies came together to help fund that.
I just had a comment. I ride my bicycle a lot. And I'll have to go check out the new linear lanes because I used to ride that all the time. I haven't been out there. But you all do a really good job on the bike lanes. And some of the cities that neighbor us, I've seen them put in really expensive bike lanes with concrete barriers and stuff, and even move the bike lane to the inside of the road. And I don't think it's very safe. So just thanks. They're great to ride here.
Good. It's really tough, because we're trying to balance all those needs in a very, limited confined space. So trying to balance all that is challenging. So I think this slide was probably more applicable to like our individual department things, but we don't anticipate really that we're going to have much carryover from 2022. We're really hoping to get all of these projects implemented. So we are focused more on CIP with transportation than necessarily operating. And really our top priorities are asset management. So we want to continue that because as really the purpose of that is you can't manage what you don't know about. So if we don't know how many missing ped ramps we have, for example, that 140 number that I mentioned, it's really hard to budget for that. It's hard to plan for that. Do we have 10? Do we have 2,000? How many do we have that we have to attack? And then how do we go back out and start to maintain those so that we're being more proactive and less reactive in managing all of those assets for the city? This is also very expensive, as you can imagine. We have 50 traffic signals. Each of those, it costs roughly, depending on the size of the intersection, anywhere from $500 to $1 million. So 50 of those, that's $50 million right there, roughly. So again, we just want to make sure that we're staying on top of that, trying to extend the life as much as possible by replacing components, taking care of our streets, taking care of our signage so that it lasts as long as possible. So that's really important, and hasn't been as much of an emphasis for many communities for a long time. It's much more reactive. Walkability is also a top priority. Again, constructing those missing gaps in our sidewalk infrastructure so people aren't forced into the street or forced onto these worn paths where it's not accessible for somebody in a wheelchair or somebody who may be, have more difficulty in walking. Possibly widening our existing narrow sidewalks. And then I've already talked about the pedestrian ramps. And then finally, pavement management. So what we analyzed through that pavement rating was that we needed about $3.5 to $3 million annually just to maintain that 59 score. That's not to get better, that's just to maintain it where it is. And so we're really looking, right now we spend anywhere from 1.5 to maybe almost 2. Last year we were around 2. Because of that additional funding through city council, we were able to spend a little bit more, but we've really been investing maybe about half of what we need just to maintain it at 59. So we're trying to identify different methods of how we could possibly allocate more money towards pavement management, because that is one of the major elements that we need. So support there from the Budget Advisory Committee would be appreciated. We have a survey out right now asking citizens about that very question is, would you be willing to contribute more funds to maintain the pavements in a higher level? So we'll see what those results come back as.
I was really pleased, by the way, to get that survey and a text message. Was really convenient. Did that go out broadly to as many mobile numbers in Englewood, or was that just because I'm on this committee, or? Because I ended up retexting it to my whole block, and people were like, this is great. Like, we want to know about this stuff.
Everybody. Yeah, I believe the intent,
Okay.
the intent was to go to everybody.
I believe so.
Okay. And is it fair then to say that at the current rate of spending to maintain our, was it OCI level of 59, that because we're falling behind each and every year, we're inevitably going to slip into that fair category?
Or poor.
Or okay.
Yeah, I think again, we're at that cusp where we need to catch the streets that are in that fair condition. Otherwise, it's like that whole rat and the snake, it's like all that's gonna move down to more in the poor category. And then we'll be spending even more money to bring those streets up to a better condition.
When I was going through the projects, it was separate from the pavement maintenance. There was an ask for collector street pavement maintenance. I couldn't remember, I was probably hearing the talks about it, but what was the difference between?
Yeah, we probably broke that down into too many categories. So our pavement management is really focused on more of the residential streets and those more minor streets. We created that separate category for more of those arterials, those things like Broadway. Dartmouth, I would put in that category probably as well, probably maybe Oxford,
Okay.
more of those busier streets. And they're usually wider, and so they take more money to do those.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and then just, we talked about the funding for streets and alleys, regional transportation improvements. I think more and more we are putting in for more grants as well. So we will be planning within the next month to put in for, we call a complete streets model for Old Hampton between Broadway and 285. So this is the area adjacent to Swedish and Craig Hospitals. And so that street, if you drive it right now, there's parking here and there. The bus transit does drive down there, but sidewalks are pretty narrow. There's the overhead power poles. And so they block a lot of the pedestrian traffic where you have to walk around the power poles. The sidewalks are narrow. We're looking at doing what's called a complete streets on that. It's really taking away, possibly, likely, the on-street parking, allowing for one lane in each direction to make more room for pedestrian elements like benches, pedestrian lighting, more street trees, all of that stuff to just improve that condition and the feel and the aesthetics over there. So that's what we'd be doing near the hospitals. We've already started to engage a project advisory committee made up of the hospitals as well as some local businesses and residents. And our application for those regional funds will go in by the end of June. So we hope to be successful in getting funding for that. The second application, the area that we're focused on is South Broadway. So basically from 285 down to Bellevue. Again, if you drive that corridor, picture that in your mind, it's very suburban. It's all about moving cars north and south, moving them through the intersections with a lot of vehicle-oriented businesses on either side. So again, how do we give that more of a facelift, if you will, from clean streets, make it feel more comfortable to walk there, maybe wait for the bus, because we do have quite a bit of bus activity on Broadway. People just don't necessarily use it. So how do we make it more comfortable and convenient for people to use that? So we'd be looking at that for another grant application here as well. So those are our two projects that we're targeting for this next round of federal funding. And then finally, just, to do all of these projects, we need good staff. And, don't need to tell you what's you hear on the news every single night about people moving different jobs, finding different opportunities. And so retaining and attracting employees is always on the top of our mind. And really giving people not only, from a pay standpoint, but what are the unique opportunities at Englewood that would attract somebody here? And it really is that variety of options that you have to work on things, I think is what sets us apart. So again, I think that's it. If you have any questions, oh, help. Yeah, I think just, again, support in those different areas and, leveraging that funding. We have been more assertive in asking for support letters from different agencies, not necessarily just the city, but like Craig and Swedish Hospital have been really stepping up to give us more of that private side support for some of these projects, and that's been really well received from the people who are evaluating and prioritizing grant funds.
City Manager Lewis had his hand up. He wanted to share some information about. I didn't see it either, but he let me know it was up. He wanted to share some information about the survey. John, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify that the survey went to 10,000 residents. So it is a sampling of our residents, but since we only have about 25,000 registered voters, 10,000 is a huge sample. As of the first day of that survey going out last week, we had over 650 responses. So we do expect to get, upwards of between 800 and 900 responses to that, and should have the results sometime early next week.
So, Sean, is it okay if we are in conversation and talk to people that would love to share their opinion to just forward it on? Or is it tracked by who you send it down to and any issues around that?
No, thank you.
To get more people involved, especially having conversations around it. And so.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great if you forward that to other folks. It's actually on our website. So it is an anonymous survey. Anyone can take that. But what we like about the sending it to the text messages of registered voters is that we can verify that they are located within the city limits of Englewood. So I guess just be careful who you send it to. But we are confident that particularly that first batch of answers were all received from Englewood residents.
Is there a demographic question confirming Englewood residents on the survey? I don't remember from when I took it. Yeah.
There is, yes.
So as long as nobody's acting too nefariously, it should be pretty solid data. That's fantastic with that sample size.
I sent it only within the confines of the newly designated Scrivets neighborhood.
Great. Yeah.
I think that gets to the 59 school. So if you looked at your streets and you said, that's what a 59 gets me, or but 3 point, is that okay? We want as a group to set that high. Most cities, Arapahoe County, I believe 70. Greenwood Village is at an 85. And then they have to spend money to that goal. So they as a community have decided that that's a priority and they want their streets at high level. They're investing in that to make it at that level. We're shooting for about a 70.
I noted on the website that Sheridan is at 70. I was a bit surprised by that.
And they've worked really hard over the last probably 5 to 10 years to really upgrade it. Invested a lot in that. And I would say they were, probably at that lower end where there were a lot of poor sections. They had to invest a lot of money.
They're paying a lot of property taxes on a bond that they used to rebuild waterfront.
Some of this last 9 years.
Yeah, we included that in the survey questions. I want to say off the top of my head, I believe it was instead of the 3.3 or 3.5, we'd be probably around the 5.5. Get us up to.
Good question. Hopefully it will be helpful for our CIP conversation. First is you have 3 buckets. You have projects, programs, and studies. Is that fair to say the programs are recurring program more for operation maintenance? Whenever we have a study opportunity, once we find a result, we'll move to the projects. Is this your decision process? Maintain and do some study collaborate with other agencies, then do new projects?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, Jackie.
Okay, and between these 2 buckets, the new projects and recurring needs, how would you separate your budget? Would you say the budget you have 50% on O&M and 50% on new projects?
I would say probably more around 30% for that O&M.
And
Yeah, that kind of
70
tried and true every single year we have to do it kind of stuff. And then probably more 60 to 70 or 60% in that new project or true project category, and then 10% real study.
Study. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Fantastic. Well, thank you, Mr. Executive, for the wonderful information. Appreciate it. All right. So we are moving on to the capital projects. Has there been any other group that has gone through this discussion and any feedback you can give us on the best way to go about it? I've got some questions that I came up with as a reviewing, but kind of, if you don't mind setting the table and give us any guidance on capital projects, and then we'll open it up for commentary from the group about questions on the process, and then we can dive into actually talking about the individual projects and prioritizing them.
Go ahead.
Well, the only feedback I've heard is from P&Z. And what they look at is they'll look at the programs, try to fund ongoing programs first. Then they'll look at the projects and then prioritize in terms of tier 1 and tier 2. But that's the only feedback I can give you, unfortunately.
And that was around some of my questions, but yeah, so. Because I guess I'll open it up, if anybody else has any comments or thoughts as a meeting that we had last month now.
Looking at, I mean, probably a huge adopt today, but I think it was hard to work through it. So I think ways to template this and probably, I mean, out of the just the spreadsheet, maybe check out. Have it. Sure. Just felt like I was going back and forth, looking at so many documents. Versus what was presented. That's all that's now that. And they just trying to get everything to add up. I mean, I did it, made my notes. That's
I like some spreadsheets. I would, I guess, to add, saying, the PowerPoint though, hit a lot of those tables. So I think that would have been. I'm still not confident that I did. As up on the screen a moment ago. but
I know unfortunately, I'm having problems with my Excel. I don't know why.
But the goal is to squeeze everything into $8 million in a 12 month. Correct.
Correct.
Yep.
And then I did take the liberty to the open space fund and the conservation
Conservation
trust
fund.
fund. I did take the liberty of incorporating those into my analysis. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I was able to come up with $8,012,000. So yeah, I agree with you. I would like to see a presentation in Excel. I love spreadsheets. I operate on spreadsheets. And
Susan, you mean the 5-year presentation to the Excel spreadsheet? Yeah.
You know,
I will admit I was not.
I agree.
Thinking,
Yeah.
how is this tier one decision I'm making impacting?
The following years, yeah.
If I have more time, if I allowed myself more time, I'd probably would put something together like that.
I hear you.
And I think that your comment on the ongoing programs versus projects to me gets into what's the right way to think about this. So on the capital improvement plan, public improvement and the capital project, 12 million or 14 million now of requests next year's funding, and so back 2, 3 years, 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff I went back and looked at the 2022 approvals, and we're just now reapproving stuff that happened last year, employee compensation stuff, ongoing maintenance, and these are programs that seem to have to go. And does that 8 million now consider the entire program for the next 5 years or beyond? Because it's clearly an index for inflation, so it's almost an operational cost versus a capital project. And how do we delineate against those to understand what revenue will be available next year from other projects falling off to, and so the lack of the revenue understanding and the impact year to year over the next 5 years, if we start to do something now and we start 30 projects, but we have to drop 15 of them because funding doesn't come in next year versus being more strategic about getting projects to completion. And that's where I had the most challenge trying to, and I dove into some previous budgets, the online open government stuff, and all that just made me more confused on it. So it didn't quite help out.
I feel this group has a great philosophy and approach. That's great. As of today, we have received recommendation from planning and zoning, Englewood Transportation Advisory Committee, but I didn't, I should not influence your vote. But they just focus on transportation, not IT related. And also we received recommendation for library board. So the city manager's office is waiting for a recommendation from Parks and Rec and BAC.
And what's, so the pavement maintenance, which addressed in the survey, looking for funding sources. So, if we get that funding, so, well, first of all, as 3 million, we're already allocating 1.85. So is this an increase of, 1.25 million, and how is that 1.85 considered in the future budget, and that kind of for projection? Was I missing something on there? Or is it just kind of, we don't have it set up that way to easily think about it? Because that either sales use or mill comes through, and it now, how does it impact this? And those were the questions that I kind of got stuck on when we were starting to think about complexities of a project that happens every other year versus every year versus a 2-year project versus an ongoing program. And even identifying which ones are meant to be ongoing programs versus projects would be helpful to say, hey, we know we're gonna have this much budget next year, this much budget next year, this is how it looks. If we do this, what's the impact in the year's future? Because if it's got in the 4th year, it just springboards, 5-fold, we've got to be able to think about the impact of that project if we're gonna allocate dollars over the next 3 years to it.
Yeah, and typically for the Public Improvement Fund, we have about $4 to $5 million each year to allocate to projects. But as you can see, of that, 3 million really should be just to maintain our streets. but we haven't even been able to finance 3 million each year. It's been around $1.5 million to 2 million.
Yeah.
So we've been below the curve there. So I think in the past, we've tried to allocate the funding for ongoing projects as best we can so that we can tackle several projects and maintain them to a certain level. Again, not at 100%. So it's a fine art and a fine dance that we have limited funding, but many deferred capital needs that need to be addressed. But so that's why we'll give you a 5-year view of the project so that you can kind of see what the need is for the, ongoing, at least the 5-year plan.
But we've got 8 million to allocate this year. If we've got 4 million next year,
Yep.
we risk having to pull some of these off the board.
No, once you fund these, then these will be funded, barring, any major spike or price
So-
hikes.
So the 8 million locks up and it's essentially 8 million moving forward each year. Next year, we've got 4 million additional on top of that. So there's at least some.
So these would be one time. So these are one-time costs that you'll be funding for $8 million. Next year, you'll be looking at, most likely, especially with these ongoing programs, same typical request, like $3 million for paving. That's just going to be an ongoing request year over year, just to maintain our streets at the 59 score. So looking at $4 million, but again, the Public Improvement Fund also funds our capital projects fund, because our capital projects fund does not have a funding source other than transfers from the general fund, unassigned fund balance, or residual from the Public Improvement Fund. So you're trying to fund not only public infrastructure projects, but also city department, the governmental department fund requests in terms of like IT needs. So you're weighing IT needs against street infrastructure or sidewalks. So how do you prioritize?
I think it would be helpful to just leave it just for O&M.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we can show you that list.
Would that be helpful? Do you think it would be helpful if we give you the name of the projects for operation maintenance, for recurring maintenance only? Would that be helpful for your decision making? Or you just want to?
Sorry, one more time.
Because we talk about, we have recurring needs just for maintenance, we have a need for new projects. Here, Josh correctly, Josh, do you prefer to get a list of a recurring program for maintenance?
Yeah, and
Would that be helpful? But like Jenny said, even we do not have enough funding, just maintain our annual maintenance.
And it would be very helpful, because I'll jump to the conservation trust, because I think it's a little bit easier to kind of explain what I'm looking at here. So Pirate Cove's maintenance, it was 55,000 last year, 56 and some change, and then index for inflation. So every year Pirates Cove has operating maintenance costs to keep it up, and every year they have to come back and ask for that budget to be able to do it. And the risk is, in 3 years, if we don't have that budget, we might say you only get 35,000 instead of the 50. So we've got these things going on that we know are going to come up every year, and they just are recurring. But is there any way to look at them more as an operational budget to say we're going to approve this as a recurring thing, because we want, I'm more hesitant to put money towards something knowing that we might lose that money in the future because half the work, or, and not having that long-term insight on what we project that we could start today, build that, here's our, it's like building a budget. Here's what we're going to need every year. We know we're going to get 4 million each year. Then really the extra money we have this year is really only 4 million above what we would normally be doing. And then how do we allocate that to new projects?
Yes.
And make sure we get to completion? And And I don't see the ability to think about it this way in terms of the information that we have, because we don't see disincoming revenue sources, impacted projects that could lead to larger revenues, and so the visibility, it's kind of, it will be great this year, but then who knows next year, and next year, and next year, we're almost kicking the can of,
Yeah,
and there's constraints that might just be the reality of it, and if that's the case, we'll work within those constraints, but I just don't know if there's a better way to think about it, especially some of these larger dollar projects.
yes, I agree. For example, we have 3 large projects, only get 1/3 of the funding. Then we allocate the money to the public improvement fund. Then we lack of funding to complete them, but the funding just sit in the public improvement fund for these 3 projects.
Mhm.
Who knows when this be completed? Does that mean we return the funding for these projects back? So we can repurpose the funding for something else? Or we continue, let the funding sitting in the public improvement fund for these 3 projects, waiting for additional funding? That's a bigger conversation, but I totally hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And does that kind of align
Yeah,
with what
no,
you're saying?
and I felt that way too. Like, the fire purchase is an easy example because that's big past. Okay, so it's like dollars a year, but it's like in year 3, I kept thinking, we still gonna have this money to give, and what, then did I just waste $2 million? You know, using that as an easy example. I know you brought up conversation on that. But, you know, that was, I was going through. This is a good year because we have extra money. But I don't know if it's the right thing to allocate that.
So this being our first year jumping on, having that, like, I didn't realize some of these projects until going to last year's to see how the cycle went. And even if these can be classified as one-time projects, ongoing programs, studies, very similar to what Public Works is doing. And then when we prioritize them, tier 1 projects, tier 1 programs, things like that, for future budgets, I think that would get a lot of insight into help make the decision, knowing that we've got these projects going on, we've got the estimate of what revenues are going on, we align our programs with 75% of our future revenues, and then we can have 25% allocated to projects and start to think about maintaining what we have and doing the things we need to do so we don't get into disrepair, allocating, you know, that's how I would like to be able to think about it, but not having the insight to see what's a program versus a project versus a study makes it very difficult too.
So in the Public Improvement Fund, we've got road and bridges, one of which is now also called our paving management project or program. We've got bridge repairs. That's our, and then we have our transportation system upgrade system. That's a program. Dartmouth Bridge is an ongoing program. We've been funding that over several years just so that we have funding to replace that bridge. Streets and lights and furniture, that's more of a smaller program. Alley construction, that's more like alley maintenance. We keep changing the name on that one. What's also important is the concrete utility. That's our city share portion. So we pretty much have to, that one is one we have to fund because that's our portion of the corners of the sidewalks.
If we have to fund that, you know, it's always gonna be a tier 1, but that
Yep.
should be like, is there a reason to have that approved each and every year if it can just be, we know this is gonna be, and even those programs, we
Right.
do an annual review where it's kind of a different conversation around them to say, add more. I mean, I think about the train, you need, the new cars are kind of that capital improvement above and beyond versus the operating needs of maintaining the track.
Yep. Then we have the concrete program for the accessible ramps. That's an ongoing program. Broadway medians on the recreation side in the Public Improvement Fund. That's an ongoing program.
Wayfinding is ongoing, it looks like.
Yeah, we still have budget. We haven't spent that down 100%, but yes, that's a relatively new program.
Yeah, like it was going on for at least 5 years.
Yep. So that's on the public infrastructure side. Now, if we go into the capital projects, which is our general government departments, their requests. So this will be more of our IT requests for our ongoing infrastructure. So our network development. We have departmental PC replacement. Security cameras.
And some of them I kind of guessed at, like, you know, like PC, you know, I mean, that's everybody. You know,
Yep.
Sitting at, you know, that's, it was like some of those was easy to kind of guess that. Other things.
Yep.
But it's-
Fiber network, yep.
it's like, well, I know, by the way, I gotta have these.
Do we have a guess from the capital improvements, how much is ongoing programs versus new projects?
Percentage wise?
What's our ongoing program budget requests out of capital improvement? So we know there's $14 million requested out of there. Out of that 14 million, what's the dollar amount that's ongoing?
I would say, let's just highlight these as we go through. Let's look at them. Alley maintenance would be one that's ongoing. Pavement management is ongoing. Wayfinding is,
Management's ongoing, but that's actually an increase from the previous year's allocation.
the allocation is, however, the request has been 3 million for the last couple years. But we just haven't been able to fund it. Because, again, we're doing this balancing act between trying to fund public infrastructure projects as well as the IT infrastructure network system, so. Dartmouth Avenue reconstruction, I think
That was one time.
that was one time. Wooden Bridge is ongoing. That's an ongoing program. Transportation system upgrade, city share of concrete.
I think from a council perspective, one of the things we can look at is not just whether it's ongoing, but whether we're properly prioritizing. So taking street maintenance as do we want more street maintenance? And if so, what would we be giving up for that? A citizen's perspective on what is valued by the public and where we should be investing our capital dollars is very helpful, regardless of whether or not we've already broken ground on projects or we're, you know, in the middle of a stream. If we need to stop doing something, that's important information for us to have.
I feel like the question she had. You were asking about. So
I
I was gonna say, I think an example of what you're describing is, let's take pavement maintenance by area as an example, so $3 million. I think that's important. I think we should proceed with it. I marked it as a tier 2 in my assessment because I don't want $3 million of our $8 million budget to be allocated to one thing. We'd have to say no to a lot of other things that I feel are important in order to fund that one line item. Is that kind of
Exactly.
an exercise?
But at the same time, we're already funding between 1.5, 2 million out of this, so even maintaining where we are and having that baseline of where we are to where we want to go, to say, I'm in agreement where we keep it at 1.5, we let the citizens decide through the ballot measure, through Miller sales use, because the reality is we just can't stretch that down. And so saying something like a 3 million, that's not tier 1 for me, but 1.5 to 2 million would be tier 1 in terms of at least maintaining that. And so I look at the program is 1.5, 1.85 or whatever it is, the allocation request moving forward on a new program would be the increase. And now I fully support the increase through the ballot measures, that's the right way to do it. If we had other funding, we could talk about it, but this is just like, we're looking at a $3 million number, not what we're currently doing. And so it's hard to offer, advice on what we should do moving forward without that baseline.
That's also helpful information for the annual report, like a strategic approach to handling this, right? Like we're gonna take 1.5 million, and if you need to ask the citizens for more money, we would recommend doing that, or, extend the citizens our way. Oh, I myself, I get tunnel vision, so
Yeah.
I want to see 3 million, that's what I want, because I want Broadway to be drivable all the time.
And tier one is continuation of,
Yeah.
and I love the study, program or programs approach where you can break it down to this level and then think about it. Our tier one project or program is maintained, right? That's always gonna be tier one. And then do we have room to increase about thinking about what future budgets are gonna be. We know we've got an extra 4 million of new projects we can allocate this year, but let's think about projects to completion versus again, starting 30 projects and now being dealt with the constraints of next year and the year on, we kind of have to massage those numbers more than being able to see it and tied to the budget.
Replace this project
With what?
replace.
How would you like to move forward? So we can get city the quantitative information they need.
I think it's now go line by line through the capital projects and public improvement fund and really talk about those, flipping back and forth, understanding long-term impact and balancing a prioritization the best we can based off of that. Any thoughts or comments on that, or we're ready to jump into it, knowing there's some constraints, some things that we'll discover that might be, see how we can incorporate it in the future type of deal.
Question. Can I just ask for clarification? I know you've taken the survey, Josh, and I have. I don't know if others have. I can't remember. They were talking about one proposal that would just maintain, right, at 59 of an OCI, the index of the condition, and then they bifurcated it between mill levy and sales tax. And then there was another option to take it to the 70 rating, mill levy or sales tax. And then I feel like there was another option about a bond, a 10-year bond.
And so it seemed that the 10-year, you're probably better to answer this, but I did see the three options. I was assuming the 10-year bond was just a shorter payback period versus a continuation of the tax forever. So we would solve the problem in 10 years, but then we would have to deal with the new problem that would be created moving forward with that bond no longer being able to fund future projects.
And the reason I'm asking for clarification on that, because if we're well under the 3 million, so if voters don't even approve the 3 million, then we're not even going to maintain the 59, right? And so to me, that was in the calculus of prioritizing things. I mean,
So is the bond or oh, that's just the
Hypothetical.
Hypothetical.
Yeah. Our assumptions, we assume 10-year interest rate 3%, but interest rate might be higher.
but there was also the option just for an outright increase in mill levies or on the sales tax side.
Which, since we're chatting about that, I did put in my feedback that a hybrid approach, I think would be preferable, because sales tax is going to be used. People coming into town will have a responsibility to pay for it. Residents tax us, and so a hybrid approach, somebody probably knows better. Would be, I think, my preferred to share non-residents or us shopping and property. I like that. We're gonna pay for the sales tax anyways, but our shopping outside, so balancing. And something probably. Some algorithms,
Well, I have to say, I mean, I try to spend. So.
it is the goal. Yeah. Awesome. So I guess if we want to just jump back up to the spreadsheet, we can start.
Sorry, I was trying to shoot this survey, but it crashed. It zoomed out and now I can't zoom it back. So, I think we could probably send the link.
Oops, thank you.
I thought it was fantastic, and I was very excited to see the 1.9 funding. for the police. In addition to the patrol officers. Another thing, if you really want to think about the reputation of the police in that community, having a this that perpetuates. I think if you think about combining those and splitting between sales use. Showing that it's not this action that's. And I also think you'll get. Because people, I put hesitant to increase the police budget because I didn't realize there was this other thing. And that even the questions came in, my answer to for the patrol. Because from when I was already thinking about how to split that $1.2 million across alternative, not realizing there was a larger chunk that was that to be honest. So that combined approach, I think, would have long-term fit in terms of people on both sides to not have to make a choice. Since we're on the topic, any other feedback on the surveys that anybody wants to share? All right, jumping into wayfinding and placemaking. This is an ongoing project, and funding has already started for this, correct? And it aligns with all of really the strategic plan of the city. So I would keep that as a top tier prioritization. Three, and that's okay.
Yeah. The next one.
You want to chat about this?
No,
one?
I'm really. I give Alley Maintenance a 1.
Alley Maintenance. Got a 1 on that?
I don't even have an alley.
So should we consider offering a $100,000? Like how should we?
You
approach
can
this?
change, yep.
And so
You can change the funding amount, yep.
are we on wayfinding? Are we at 170 from that, or with your concern down alley maintenance, same thing?
I would agree with Suzanne on the wayfinding of pulling that down some. I don't,
Yeah, there were other touchy-feely things that I gave high priority. So I'm sure I will have plenty of ones that you guys will over through. So I don't feel strongly.
It's aligned with so much of what we're talking about as a city, but it's hard to understand what the actual long-term impact, especially seeing it was almost $1 million over 5 years. And so without understanding, what that generates in terms of goodwill or revenue, it's a big chunk of money for signs. And
There were just other things within the price point, so to speak, that felt were. Again, I don't think.
Or do you want to skip this one to go through the list and come back?
I'd say let's cut it to even cut it by 50% now, and we can come back and readdress based off of what our totals are.
I think I would get confused. When I build a budget, when I build a budget, outside of this room, I always create a big budget. And then I roll things down. So if we identify all of our tier 1s, including wayfinding, and then realize that we're budget, we can go back and then reduce it to 170. Figure out where we want to.
Yeah, okay, so keep everything on the full amount right now, and then we'll whittle back based on that.
would it work just to go through this list and ask for a show of hands, like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, how we rated it, and then kind of see what the majority of the committee felt?
I think that should, or 632.
And I think it's 3 votes or more, we put it on the list and then whittle it down
Yeah,
on tier 1.
and speaking for myself, if I feel strongly about something, I'll chime in. Wayfinding is not one.
So is that, yeah, just call for, who thinks that's tier 1, and if you're saying 3 or more, we
Yeah.
classify it.
Wayfinding tier 1.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could weigh in on this for just a second. Thank you. I did want to let you know that we are getting really good pricing from our 2 local sign vendors, Boyd Signs and Royal Signs, on the wayfinding gateways and some of the placemaking that we've called for. And it actually, I think that 170 is a little high. So I think if we can keep that in tier 1, but I think we could lower that, even starting at as low as, 125. I think that would be fine.
There was only one project I thought, or I saw still this tier 1 that didn't have this year's cost. And that might be the only consideration if we want to lock that in fund into next year. I think they moved all other projects that didn't have this year's cost down to tier 2 or tier 3, and I'm fine with Public Works' recommendation on the. So 0 on traffic calming, Dartmouth reconstruction. This is a 1-year project.
Quick clarification, that's separate from the bridge replacement project?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. We gotta get federal money.
Tier 1 on Dartmouth Avenue reconstruction west of Santa Fe. You got 3.
Was it? Okay. Sean, do you have a response?
Unmuted.
I'm so, did you hear my
Yes.
response a few moments ago?
Oops. Okay, now I don't know how I have 2 of these.
Jenny, I think I'm fine. I'll submit my comments in the chat.
Can you, don't know if anybody can call him or.
Looks like we got 100,000. So
I don't hear him.
the road and bridge is ongoing.
Yes.
Tier 1. I think it's tier 1 on the bridge. Broadway corridor study. This was one time.
Hearing my, Jenny, you highlighted.
Oh, it's a tier 1, sorry. Getting confused with my tier 1s and my programs. It's not reoccurring.
So the match association.
Well, there were definitely had some help on it. Surrounding cities.
Yes, I think it's a multi-jurisdictional study.
And it,
And which people are.
I would put this at
I
tier 1
would say.
study. Starting point.
And if we have help.
Transportation system. They've got a lot.
So to be clear,
Oh, you want me to do a cumulative total?
I think it's more just intermodal
Okay.
access, yeah. Pass.
That's all accessibility. Interpretation of.
I just assumed it was two different things. That's a part of. I would keep walking away like tier one for now. That's important. Or I think getting into the intricacy. Yeah, about.
It's in. On the other side of the planet.
So Santa Fe. So this would be our portion, and that's another thing that'd be useful on these spreadsheets. Additional funding is a part of the allocation, because that would, trying to remember, that help us expand the dollars in it. Traffic signal, 5 years. This comes along with 3 other. Base as well. Like ongoing maintenance of the parking lots. And kind of mess. Let's keep it on for now.
I guess just for sake of. Hey, back. Drop that by. So it doesn't get drastically bad, but I seemed like it was kind of an area. I think that's. Their goal is to never get to that. I know what you mean. I mean, we're right now, and I know, you know.
No, you are absolutely right.
All right, Old Hampton.
That was. Yeah, that's a tier one for me. Ever created this, you know?
Yeah, I went tier one as well, because I really get the sense that the city's focusing in on, the newly designated wellness district. And there certainly is a lot of intermodal transportation there. I know when I go drive through there, I'm always on high alert for peds and bikes and people who are mobility impaired.
So that one does have a 6.5 million hit next year. It's not an ongoing, but there is a significant investment for next year. But there's only gonna be 4 million available next year. We need outside funds, and this is where my stance on this would be completed when we know we can have all the funds, and getting started with, 20% of the project and putting 1.2 million at risk is a little bit of a concern, not knowing what would happen with that funding next year.
Yeah.
Sidewalk gap. This is an ongoing, I would say this is tier one.
At some point, that should start to abate a little bit. Or, I don't know, maybe not, I don't know if the city has.
They've got 300,000 for the next 5 years. And then, we're moving into the section where most of these were class. Tier two, sidewalk, or, street light and furniture repair, replacement. This is 30 grand for the next 4 years, so 120 total.
That was an interesting.
I agree.
Street lights and furniture.
Streetlights is a tier one for me, furniture repair replacement, as much as I want the civic center to be presentable and comfortable.
I took that as like furniture near the street.
Yep. Yeah, the benches,
I could
yeah.
be totally wrong on this, but I think when Director DeAndrea was talking about the Fleet Street Initiative, and it included things like benches and better lighting and better amenities, I think this is a Fleet Streets project as opposed to a weird amalgamation of these.
I read it as a tier two.
I would keep it at tier one because of the street light.
Was it, but it's a replacement or is it maintenance? To me, I took it as replacement as kind of Jim was business. You. And furniture versus maintaining what's already there.
Here's what I propose. Let's leave it in at 30, and then when we go back. They were $20,000 going to streetlights, $10,000 going to free. Or $20,000. Do we?
I would
More
keep it in
definition.
because of the street lights specifically, yeah. Attendant traffic calming, safe routes to school initiatives, 60 this year, moving into 150 up to 200,000 by year 5. So there is ongoing on this project. It is rated as a tier 2. I mean, I'd be interested in a study around there more so as a tier 1 project in the future, but not necessarily rolling.
It's the other calming neighborhood initiative. I would not. Kind of like. Could we ask if that's the.
Yeah, good, so.
Because it seems like we're just dicing it up.
Yeah.
Safe routes to school is a specific statewide program. That basically maps out routes to school for kids to bike and walk, and then provides funding in this case to basically make them safe to do that. So it definitely fits under the same concept, right, of Vision Zero and traffic calming, but it's a kind of a unique program that's focused specifically on younger children doing this safely.
And so again, doing up to 60,000 is for initial study, and then the future funding is built in there with the 150, or where the funding breakdown is.
Sure.
Because if it was, like I said, I'm concerned about the future funding of this one and what the impact there would be. So I keep it as tier 2 for that. Nothing this year for Broadway safety, arterial and collector street pavement maintenance. Here too.
So was,
So these were the Oxford streets, Broadway, Dartmouth.
Dartmouth. So we know the city, the street scores for what's currently going on. What's the impact of not allocating this maintenance to these roads? And what's currently being allocated, if anything?
It's currently. Let's see.
And then related to that is the 3 million that we're talking about, the non-collector and arterials. So like residential streets, is that distinction of why they're separated?
That was kind of the question I asked, I mean, that was what she asked,
Okay.
because I think, I kept it as a tier two.
Yeah, I had the arterials as a tier one and residential's tier two. A lot of that has to be built out. Like $3 million, I just want to take $3 million.
Which is this, it could be one budget where we've got some counts and the arterials. Focus on one, ignore the other versus.
So we don't have any current, any funding right now for the arterial streets.
No, so, you know.
It's going for the pavement.
The question is, what's the risk on that? First, almost put it into tier two as well, so.
So I didn't
Maybe
look at
that's
it
a good
tier one.
recommendation.
Am I on with that?
I didn't
I'm,
hear yours.
I'm,
Am I the one who felt that arterial and collectors? Tier one? I'm not going back for it.
Yeah.
to me, it's a tier one, the same as, the other payment maintenance. Because we gotta take care of our roads.
I'm with you, I'm generally for all the heavier infrastructure. That one, maybe we could ask them to compromise with dollars.
Or is that one if we get the funding for, interior, the residential roads we follow, we can pick this up in a future year. Because if, you know, contingent on that funding to be able to shift what we're currently pulling from presumably a general account to fund our current road conditions, we would still save money and have the bill that we could cover everything.
And maybe could our recommendation be fine? So I think director even acknowledged that they probably split it up differently. And then if you have a pavement budget, say they want $4 million, then you prioritize. Some that includes not just splitting it out between bigger cycle. I mean, from a citizen's perspective, I mean, I get the delineation, but to me, it's like, it's all sidewalks. Is how I look at it.
Whether I'm on Oxford or Pearl, I'm on
Yeah.
a city road and I'm not delineating the difference. So,
I tend to agree with you from our purpose for sure, because yeah, to me, sitting here, I'm not sure what the difference. And as far as I'm concerned, they know what needs to be paid.
Yeah.
So for our purpose. maybe they're
This
more-
scares me that we're not contributing anything to it and it's fine with our $1 million each year for the next year. And I'm like, what are we doing there? But, and so that's why I pushed it to tier one, but I think combining those two to think about them as the same pot of money to it.
I agree.
So I guess the notes section would be, you know, balanced with the pavement. Need be, you know, is that an opportunity to include it in the, ballot?
I would hope that.
We'll fund it, and then if we need to reduce the funding amount, we'll adjust accordingly.
Honestly, I'm okay not funding at this point.
Okay.
We've already got the 3 million.
Yeah,
for the
okay.
pavements
Yeah,
and kind
They
of
can allocate them.
get
Okay.
3 million for both of these right now until future funding comes in and. That's reconstruction, tier two. Same thing. I think this is going deeper when. Public art act. Tier two removals.
Return on that investment. Clients, you know, think about our cost every year. I mean, I'm all.
Justify.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I love the art. that's coming in. That $50. Yeah,
It's a-
I
it's
agree.
a-
Yes.
Bridge repair sucks in tier one, keep it.
Anything IT.
I kept, network development. Just kind of my business. Fiber network, I did go down to tier. I love the idea, I just don't. I don't think prioritizing over.
So there's a revenue generating opportunity out of it. It's such a huge dollar and wasn't long-term plan like $1 million for the next 20 years and it's like understanding the viability and benefit of it and the risk of putting that much money. It's hard one to say yes to.
Felt like if we could, easy for me to say, but if there was grant money, there was something there helping with that. Maybe there is, and I don't remember, but that, I think possibly more of a sway.
I was our IT director actually about this today. So the challenge is that there's many variabilities to it. I mean, there's other cities that have adopted different models of doing this. There are many different ways to go about this. I think the grant part is particularly challenging because a bit of grant money comes from the federal government for this purpose. Fairly rural, but communities that fit certain that don't have access the way urban areas do right now to. Not to say that there can't be things we're exploring, and there are many different options that we are looking at, but his initial. And that's, again, if we just paid for it, I mean, there are many different ways to approach.
And that would connect all the city buildings, and the idea in the future is to be able to web off of that into future services for residents.
Possibly, yeah, possibly.
I mean, to me, this is more of we would need a bigger study on the full impact of it to understand, and so I'd be more apt for a study around fiber network to get a better understanding.
I think it's pretty cool. I work close to the industry, but it's a big number. And it seems to me that once we spend $1 million, we're going to need to spend the other $1 million. Make it a viable number.
I mean, getting to 20 million over 20 years just seems like a trap to drop that off from the future budget and waste a lot of money.
And I want the auto pay option. As long as you fund that.
Yeah.
I want the auto pay.
So, I'd say tier 2 for this for everyone.
But maybe that,
Just a better idea of what it's gonna be. That's a big cost, just say $1 million.
well, yeah, what does it really do? And I'm not totally up on it. I remember.
That's super rad, but I can
It
watch
is super
Netflix
rad.
on Netflix on multiple TVs in my house already. It's like,
At what point is fast enough, so.
Well, and it was long-term infrastructure, because Sean mentioned it was truly underground or buried fiber, so it's heavy.
fun and connecting the buildings, the efficiencies there, there's just too many questions to that. Facilities and operations. This is public works. This jumps up into millions moving forward in the next few years. So this is 1.3, 2024, 1.3, 2025, down to $1 million. Do we have insight into what this one's specifically for?
Does it include building a new center?
I don't think it's a building a new center, but it's just overall maintenance of our building facilities.
Those ones are in pretty rough shape from, if I'm remembering the right presentation.
I kept it as a tier one. I felt like, facilities, I didn't feel like I could bring it down.
I'll give it tier one.
assuming that there was nothing new that was. Possibly explaining. But I saw that. Thanks.
I agree, so let's keep that 2-1 for now. ADA compliance, and this, they have projections over the next 5 years.
That's a tier 1.
Tier 1.
Me as well.
This is,
So basically, project costs that are funded in the capital projects fund, we allocate 1%. So that's why I put that formula there. So it's basically
we'll keep
1%.
that as a tier 1 because I think we have to. Emerald ash for mitigation, this looks to be ongoing. My understanding is it's a pretty gnarly problem, and I'd keep that as tier 1. Emergency exits in library. Ability for the fine for tier 1 on these ones as well. And the long-term safety impact and for all patterns. Staying with the emergency.
Sort of. The library has 2, so I think it's client based upon. Close it off on. So that there's no way to come, actually should help.
So is the emergency exit, part before them?
Emergency exits are always a good idea because when you're in the library, you'll note that back section of the library, there's not a lot of trucks.
Okay.
So I think this would be useful, assuming that we continue to maintain this building. Library, that's.
Yeah, that was my question, like, about this feasibility study. The library is not going to be for that long. It's not a huge amount, but.
Does that feasibility study open this space for other things? So, and it's not just a library.
The feasibility study was to test the use.
It's to go from the 2 entrances to the 1.
Just for the.
Just for the library. I keep both of those.
The numbers don't look terribly high.
And it's a 1-year expense as well, so I'd keep those. Management, nothing this year. Security cameras. I guess my question is why on the security cameras and where? That's a tier 2, but
I don't know the specifics of what. I think we have a security camera program, and I think some of them are placed last year, I think, and so I think I could be wrong on this, but.
I think this is here.
I thought it was. It's on this. I thought that to me, I see.
I agree, pushing that to tier 1 position.
Yeah, I think on any of these.
Phone system replacement, that's a tier 2.
Well, and it struck me a lot of employers are moving away from phone systems entirely. I know we have.
Paying, type in for the cell phone.
Or using using Teams or some other interface like that?
Badge system tier 3. There. Service center. 1.25, that's been reclassified as a tier 1. Again, the funding of that project without, just 0.25 this year, that over the 50 going to come from next year is too scary.
I kept it as a 2. That's where I don't see.
These projects, like the challenge is like, if it, even on a good year where we have 8 million, how are you ever gonna get 15 million to cover a project like this? And without understanding what that life cycle, two station funding is gonna be, it makes it near impossible to try and improve something.
Did I understand correctly, the director is saying that Cherry Hills Village houses some of their fleet there as well?
We service vehicles for Cherry Hills Village and Sheridan
Okay.
out of our service. One of the challenges with this particular line item, and I'm not trying to push the committee, the service center is a facility where your average citizen is actually never going to that point. So we do a lot of city business out of there, storage and handling of sand and road vehicles and all the stuff that Public Works uses to make the city run behind the scenes. But John Q. Public and Jan Q. Public are probably actually never going to be there. It's a very large facility. And also very old.
You need to listen to that part of the presentation.
I was gonna try to go out there sometime about summer. An hour walk through. We drive to the park. It would seem to me too, if we're having other cities pay us to do service there, that it does have some value to us.
And does it generate some? So
Maybe we just.
I'm still not in favor of the one, but scratching it off.
I'm wondering, something with this price tag, I wonder, like several years ago when we had the initiative for the rebuild of the police department, I wonder if it rises to that kind of level. It may not be that, I don't know, interesting to voters or something, but there need to be a lot of education around its importance. And perhaps it could be entered into with the neighboring municipalities or something.
How does public facing?
Yeah.
And the benefit and the need of it is, there's no argument there. It's how do you, when you've got a limited fund and you're looking at 4 times the average amount next year, like there's just no feasible way to put that in consideration based off of the budgeting constraints. And like a project like this needs to have an alternative funding method to be able to take it to completion. And that's where, I would definitely support that. There's especially with these numbers, and it's presumably only going to get worse, but what can we do?
Shall we put note alternative funding?
And then the last couple are going to be, common area furniture and then a security service center and rents. The security one, knowing if that's a concern and what's going on with that. Common area.
I think both are important. But if we want
I kept it at 2. It's on security.
and it's $20,000, I think there should be a lot of return on that investment.
I
so let's, we're at 9.7 and we've got to be at 8, so just a little
That's
bit.
not too bad.
Cut back. Having gone through the list, we want to jump back up to the top and really want to set the shade.
Talked about combining the two street maintenance line items. Reducing the overall.
So I,
I'd like to sort of like finding. I just feel like when we're. And if I'm the outlier, I won't argue with you guys. When I think about other line items that.
So if you would add something,
Please.
just wanted to, City Manager Lewis did have to jump off, but when he was having trouble, he did want to say that the costs for signs, and we're using a local sign company, are significantly lower than what we expected. So he's expecting that, you know, regardless of whether it's funded or not, it would, well, funded, the cost is actually more like 120.
that's useful. Because of how this aligns with this, with the neighborhood renaming with the strategic initiatives, I'm not inclined to completely remove it, but I think 170 is just. I would put this maybe, you know, between 75 and 100. And because it does align with so much of what we're trying to do from the personality of the city, but it's restricted, so I'm between 75 and 100 for this one.
Can we get done the objective though by cutting it that much? 20.
That is, I mean, I can't answer that, but he did say that our, that the cost estimates are coming significantly affected, so it's hard to know.
Well, meet in the middle between Josh's preference and current projection of 125 and 7.
I mean,
Is that
I don't know how comfortable they'll be.
I mean,
We got
14
1.7 out of the total. So I guess unless we're gonna allocate it across all of the items and everything. I'm fine with that.
alley maintenance.
Some people complain about it. I've lived in a couple alleys here. I mean, they do a good job. I'm always okay with the alley, though. I don't think we have a huge alley problem. Down some of.
I think the big challenge is the drainage around the alleys, and this is shaped to avoid having to pave all the alleys to keep.
That's what I call, that's two different perspectives. My alley fine right now, but I know you can follow the challenges. And I don't think we.
Paving's a lot more
But
expensive.
I mean,
Yeah.
I can only imagine the cost. And I love the dirt alley myself. I like running.
So keep it at 150 then?
Hey, can I ask a question for and this is kind of what I was speaking to earlier, I wasn't sure if I actually did this correctly, but with respect to conservation, trust fund. Yeah, and how do those fit into this?
Those are separate funds.
Okay, but so that's where I'm getting confused. Is I did incorporate them into my analysis, but we're not part of the 8 million.
No, because they have their own funding source.
That's right. But then in the email, it said something like consider.
So
Oh, yeah, you can consider
Yes, yes.
the funding of those
we
as
can
well.
go and say we think this is a two project, don't do this, we think this should prioritize, but there appears to be enough funding in the budget. This is where I think the conversations about moving forward come into play, because budget, or the fund has 2.2, but 1.7 is allocated to projects. And so there's only 550,000, but there's only 300,000 from the Colorado lottery that goes in each year. And so if we allocate something that has future costs, you know, that 300,000 is almost used just about every year. And so it's really constrained, not necessarily this year, but looking forward to see what happens.
Welcome.
Public maintenance, I would be apt to keep it at the current funding level until, the citizens opine on it.
Just think that's.
Now, just so I'm clear, we're gonna leave the 3 million and take out the million that, or maybe we already took it out.
I think we already took out.
Yeah, we already-
That's fine.
And so if we keep it at the same funding, I think technically gets allocated, if we even move it up to like 2. Actually get more to the arterial roads, but, and so we get into a vote, I don't think you can allocate the full.
Yeah, so we're gonna cut this one and see about that.
The arterial, and even still 55 right now. It increases where they are, it gives them a little bit more leeway, touch some of the arterials where you need to, but we need citizens to.
Jenny, didn't you say that we're only about $1 million apart from the 8 million available, and our first flush took us to 9 million?
9.7,
9.7, okay.
Yeah. about $1 million, yeah, $1.7 million off.
Dartmouth Reconstruction.
I just, is I'm actually gonna put a plus up here, so we know what our total is. We're at 951,000. Oops.
We already pulled the Hampton. That was another big ticket. Good concerns about.
Yeah, we got that still on there.
This is potential grant, so
So would 1.2 be our funding towards it, and the grant would cover?
the construction piece.
I can't resist the mark.
So what's the 6.5 million for next year then?
That
our
would be,
contribution of
that
the-
would be the construction, so.
What does that do to next year's? Capital projects and. where does
Well,
that-
that's why if we get the grant, then
The grant would
would
cover the
would cover,
6.5.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, see,
So that's potential. I mean, but we haven't been awarded the grant yet, so.
So is the 1.2 retrievable?
Oh, yeah, no, we can unfund that and, you know,
And all-
reappropriate it.
And all 1.2 is necessary to qualify.
That's my understanding.
that always has.
Yep.
Is it,
Just seems desirable.
and especially since it's 0 next year, not 6.5. Are we putting the 1.2 in escrow to get the grant? Is it we get the grant, then we need to fund the 1.2?
We can double check with Maria.
Because if we're locking it up, no risk, I'm inclined to do it. If, what's the risk around the money and
And
how
we can,
much-
and we can qualitatively say that we'll fund it if we get the grant, but we, I mean, right, but we have to allocate the funding.
I would say fund it if we get the grant, and then we can even think about backup funding. Where we should repurpose that money to. So fund if we get the grant, or an agreement on that one. I think we'll need to skip that. Bridge. I'm inclined to keep that as is. Any objection to that? Corridor.
I don't like that.
I've got it back up 100,000. You know,
I the same way in the same station, the counselor. It's a lot of work. Obviously. Maybe,
How much is the pavement gonna overlap and feel private sort of pavement?
yes. Yes, maybe we can ask,
So what's the walk and wheel? The,
which is, are those for? We're still.
951,000, yeah.
so concrete utility share, we've gotta do every year. So that one, there's no change we would make to that one. Walk and wheel and concrete program accessible, those would be the two that we kind
Well, I was wondering on that. My mind, that's more higher. It was the trade-off. I wanted the accessible ramps. But also the thing with the sidewalk. I have to say, they're my lowest, maybe. They're definitely my two of my favorite items on. Hard for us.
Just throwing out numbers, maybe drop walk and wheel to 100 and concrete to program to 300 to 250 even. And those are if the funding, we don't get the grant for the Hampton, that 1.2 can shift into something.
It's an assessment.
Signal equipment, upgrade and replacement. You're gonna kind of get that one. Union Bridge, 1.8 next year on this one. Is there any grant or that would help that project or 1.8 be out of?
I don't know at this point. I'm sure we're looking at grants
That
wherever we
1.8
can,
savings,
yeah.
Should probably look so that. Thinking how much rehab is required to keep this.
I also look at it through an equity lens a bit here, and you're talking about an area that connects income, part of our community, and we, just approved one of the more affluent areas of our community, which is that Swedish Hospital Wellness Center area. So just a thought.
That's a great point. How do we make sure that we're not wasting $400,000 on that community versus getting the full project into? And off those trade-offs, I'd almost pull from Hampton for the equity, purpose.
again, like.
I'm for both of them, I mean, to be clear.
I'm just not familiar with it. I don't see it, I don't use it. It's the maps meeting. I'm open to hearing about it. I just.
Braintree Hill recommendations here because.
Well, and that was my question, is how severely.
It gets heavy industrial usage, so the waste management transfer plant is right there. There's a lot of other industrial business centers that line Union Avenue, and then you do have a lot of pedestrian and bike traffic going under on the Flat River Trail there.
It gets heavy industrial.
Okay.
What I think I needed to hear. So
Page
$400,000.
Like I drive an F-150 and I'm bone rattling as I go across the street, so.
How do we get the, make sure that the funding gets, happens for next year? At this point in time, I agree with you, but, you know, if we have half as much to allocate next year and the project's not gonna get shorter.
I guess.
But then do we allocate the 400 or look at alternative funding for something?
Yeah, I guess to me, I'm trying to take these at face value.
Just, if we allocated the 400, obviously the city would go and vet the project, make sure that it could be completed, thinking about the future funding concerns and not just, you know, start too many projects and not knowing what I'm assuming there's at least gonna be some checks and balances beyond what we are talking about to be prudent with the funds.
I would imagine so. And if we do get grant funding, then it would ratchet that priority up pretty high.
This is
But
where-
but these are all what ifs. I don't know.
Yeah, and this is where the insight into the projects is a little bit limited on some of these longer capital projects to understand what happens next year, you know? How do we ensure that we're not, it's cost of completion versus this year's cost? This one is a cost of completion challenge.
Looks like the 1.8 comes in 2025 though. I don't know if that's a consideration.
It has been updated to 2024.
Okay.
Was this a tier 2 project?
They got, this is tier 1.
Oh,
I
tier-
mean,
they
I
moved
prefer
up
to
tier
see a
1.
study on this one, how we can, or alternative funding on this one. Getting too much to it. Yes. Time comes right here.
And it's a match.
I'm with the match, I'd keep it.
Is on the 250, like that.
Yeah, I have a comment on the ERC upgrades, because our GO bond for Parks Rec, we're going to refinance 2023. We're thinking to keep at the same mill levy, see how much we can borrow based on the interest rate. Can we delay the upgrade for one more year and combine all the needs in one big financing?
I would support that.
Yeah.
Now, would that remove it from, conservation trust and, open space as well?
No, that's the,
The ERC upgrades had funding from all three.
I think it's a part of public improvement fund, right? There's 200,000.
This one is.
This
Yeah.
one is, but there's
There's
corresponding.
yes,
Yeah,
in
so
another fund
I would keep across all three funds that same.
for same purpose. Okay. Make a note. Yeah.
improved, but it's
Make a valid point that the parking lot is maintained, but
I would say, minimum funds for maintenance on the parking lot right now. And if we need improvements or upgrades packaged in the geo bond, but
What does that mean?
Other funds.
what's the minimum funding to make it not go to terrible?
see how destroyed the parking lot gets and when.
There's other funds.
Conversation next year, let's say.
I don't know, they have it here.
I'm trying.
for a reason.
I just saw
Steve's gonna give me a hard time about this.
I can hear my phone ringing up.
$20 grand. They're $20 grand at it.
Yeah, are we paving it? Is it just the striping?
It's, I'd say,
I feel like we're splitting hairs a bit on. I'm not gonna argue it right now.
Old Hampton, but keep sidewalk. So there's enough for
Streetlights was. I think it's. This on the street. Opening. Great. I'm the only one that's
I would
favoring
say
streetlights.
prioritize streetlights. So don't ignore furniture because these are benches that especially, people out. Around there, but. Bridge repairs upkeep. Network. Definitely keep what happens if we drop it to 200. Those are questions to ask. Oh, this is internal network, not what's right in the house.
Can I go back to the bridge repair real quick? Is the dollars hoping that savings.
It could, I mean, it's just general bridges, yeah, it's just, yeah. But the other dollars are specifically for Union Bridge.
I'm sorry.
Any change to bridge repairs, we want to keep that. Fine to keep. Facilities and operations, again, fine to keep, but is it,
Can we trim it?
yeah,
That's my.
what's the impact of trimming and? No change to ADA compliance.
I want to reevaluate these.
I wouldn't mind that either.
That's, I agree.
And now give you a little time to research some of these line items.
Jimmy, can you sort by? Yeah, sort. You guys open it?
Oops. This is where I can't see.
Do it the other way.
Oh,
Basically.
To check out that my data has headers, bro.
It has to sort by, there's no sort by city.
Oh, thank you.
This was the dual pavement maintenance plus the arteries. And what's the rest of the arteries if we don't have any funding for them right now? At least we got down. What's the budget? Last year was 1.8 something. I think 5 is what it. Reality is we need to get this out of this fund on the, sales. Proper. Following it.
How was it 664?
I don't recall. We still have time, because we're so close.
They had 686. So they said that.
Yeah, well, it's operation.
That's gonna be a hard cut to swallow.
No, maybe. But I mean, I like the optics. And the bridge, you're right, it's terrible. And the ped path is.
What about the Dartmouth Avenue reconstruct? Because there is the Dartmouth Avenue bridge replacement that is going forward, it sounds like. So I wonder if that's a compromise to delay that for a future year.
I would favor the bridge, Dartmouth bridge. Then Dartmouth Avenue. Or even,
Can I weigh in?
please.
The Dartmouth Bridge reconstruction has really probably been going on since about 2014. It's been approved 2 or 3 times, and then by the time they get ready to do it again, we need more money. And I think now, Jackie, it is in the budget now, and is the money in to reconstruct Dartmouth Avenue Bridge? Because we got more grant money.
2022 budget.
Is it in the 2022 budget?
We have funding. It's just a matter of, like the Dartmouth Bridge, we have $2.1 million. But I don't know if that is enough for the reconstruction.
We've gotten increased grant money at 2 or 3 different times during that period. So I don't know if the thinking is the same on the Union Avenue Bridge. But I thought that the Dartmouth Bridge is ready to go forward.
Looking at it, and is it something that we can extend that million over 2 years and do half in 2023, half in 2024? That something worth considering. That's something viable for the project.
I would say the safety of the bridge has been an ongoing concern as far as its general condition. And over time, bridges, they don't get safer. So, I'm hesitant to kick that can any further down the road while I sit on council personally. Some of these items, as Councilmember Russell discussed, have been talked about dating back nearly a decade now to my time on BAC. So these big projects, there has been a tendency in the past for councils to say, oh, there's a lot of money in that pool. Let's drain it and spend it somewhere else. And it doesn't make the project need to be done any less. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're facing now as we're looking to prioritize capital, is we have a bunch of things that have been deferred over the years. And we have a bunch of things that need to be done now, and some things that need to be done right now. And so I think that project in particular is probably something that is going to go forward regardless of the recommendations that we get from various committees, just because of the general urgency of it and how long it's waited to get to the point that it's happening.
Union Avenue.
Document.
So we have 2.1 already allocated to it. This gets us across the finish line. What is $500,000 versus $1 million additional? Look to the changes to the final, like, those are the nuances of the, again, I agree with everything you're saying, but the nuances of how this budget's set up.
Yeah.
We've only got X number of dollars this year to allocate. We don't know how many dollars next year to allocate. So that's the challenge of looking at these types of projects in this budget. And I understand how they can get deferred because of, you know, that setup, not separating the ongoing projects that we need to continue to fund, so other bridges don't get this done versus payments. And this is where our history of not raising taxes, not raising mills, like all that is now catching up to us, where we, in a very unfriendly environment, so we've got to go push to get more money coming into the city.
What's on Rose 14?
So-
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought I understood that the two projects are separate, though. The bridge replacement is one thing on Dartmouth, and then kind of a extension of that would be the rebuilding of the
Yep,
street. And
this is
so
the
I was
street.
only asking about the street.
Right.
And it
Right.
sounded like the director was saying the bridge is already in her plan for the coming year, and that's great. So I was strictly asking, just to be clear, about the street reconstruction and not the bridge.
And there's an approach that goes with that, and you would hear Director DeAndrea probably say this. I don't want to put words, but at the time that we're going through the process of disrupting the bridge, rebuilding it, if we can update nearby, there's an economy of scale that can be applied there. The engineering works together. We're already disrupting part of that roadway as we rebuild the bridge. So doing it all at once actually makes more sense from a fiscal standpoint than to separate the projects out.
Thank you.
And that road is really bad between the bridge and Santa Fe. Yeah.
And some of these other projects, I think it might be helpful to hear more from
Mhm.
Director DeAndrea and Public Works. If the committee has additional information that they request, you'll see in your email tonight from the city manager. You're free to request that information.
Yeah.
That's an important part of the process.
We need to arrive on this budget recommendations tonight. June 9th is when it needs to be submitted. So we would have a chance to email about it if we want to get together with three or more of us at Senate. Closure and
I mean, it might be good for me to sleep on it and have this updated spreadsheet where we are today, and then I'm happy to get together again if we need.
Yeah.
Let's,
I would like to be considered, actually.
Well, sane, and so.
Or if you have, if you have additional questions for, yeah, for Director Deanne.
I feel like we made this pretty good, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're 400,000 away with that 1.5. So definitely got it a lot closer and can work. So, Jen, you'll send this out to everyone.
I'll send it out tonight.
Fine.
I might forget.
Need a sticky
And then, yeah, we'll just start an email chain and share feedback, and if we request a meeting, we'll that meeting.
Right.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, just forward those on to me. I can forward them on to Maria, DeAndrea, Director DeAndrea, and
IT.
and then or any of the directors, actually, yeah.
And then on both the
And we'll send you
conservation
responses.
trust and the open space funds, if you have any commentary on reclassifying tier 1 to tier 2 or vice versa, please include that in the emails too. There is coverage for all the projects that look like out of those funds, so that wasn't as much of a yeah, thinking about the long-term impact of the privatization will be our feedback there.
And the money that is allocated in those two other funds is just intended fully for this year. Is that how I should be looking at those?
The
I mean, they may
unappropriate,
have had the 5-year plan, I didn't necessarily look at those.
because the unappropriate balance is basically the leftover cash that we can allocate to projects. Revenue will replenish it next year.
Okay.
The unappropriate based off of what's been assigned to something, what doesn't have a home, and what.
Okay, thanks for
Is
that.
that, is that
Yep,
right?
yep.
Okay. That's just me.
And we're all new to this process. This is the first time a budget advisory committee's actually commented on it. So we're figuring it out as we go. All right, well, moving on to the next thing, and we'll try to get the right window. We had the problem in the holidays where our meetings kept getting moved for a couple months, and we sent out moving it to or the that would say starting which would September started the cycle from as far as we're concerned, the meetings. So with that vote, is there a motion to approve this vote and shift the meeting okay, after conclusion of this vote? Right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Does that approve?
So we're starting the third Tuesday,
The third
starting
Tuesday.
in September, starting in
In
September.
September, correct?
Okay, I had us starting in June, so.
Sorry, I take that. So, I think it's changing, so Code Next is all over. Sorry, I'm looking.
Oh, me, yeah.
Because that might include me, because when we kicked this thing off, it was supposed to be third.
Actually, don't.
Well. Have to be. There is a budget.
Okay, well.
So if it ends up being. Why don't I reach out to
Yeah, I mean, we get done, but I don't think we need to. revisit them. For the group's benefit, I would think.
The ultimate goal is to make sure nobody's excluded, because this was the starting night. So as long as you're not excluded because of the go next, I would say we move forward with Tuesday, because everyone can make that work. And
Okay.
be available.
Give me 24 hours to reach out to you. In a regular meeting, that a regular is in place.
I would say if that does become an issue, just keep it on the fourth Tuesday and
Then when code next is.
get it off of, this and bring that.
With the simplest thing.
Yeah, right.
All right, so, that would be a motion to.
If there is a conflict, we'll on. The fourth.
No people. But is not workable? Is the default to stay at the 4, or is the default to also look at that? The also ramp that did not get selected?
Just because.
Yeah, and this might be resolved if Nancy tells me, oh, no, you're good. So,
If not, maybe we do rank choice voted, 1, 2 can't go, and then we make sure everyone can go and take the highest.
and I'll tell you,
All right, members' choice.
The only thing I'll say quickly is that when we do plan that, we take how long. And how we can.
See, I think
having a presentation, same time we were doing it, I think. So, but we didn't know, right? Just think we just need that.
Agreed, that actually the CIP should be a standalone meeting, discussions, because it's enough in it where, so, I kind of had that thought as I was reviewing, I could make it, a later meeting. All right, and next meeting is not June 21st, it's gonna be the 28th, because I think that's the
28th.
fourth Tuesday.
That's
so,
correct.
That is an update on the agenda, June 28th for the next meeting. And that will cover everything for tonight. Have a great rest of your night.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. Oh, so you did it so well.
Good night, Tim.
Been busy here, obviously, since I was last.
I feel like